Just to remind members that the meeting is being live streamed. So obviously, if you've got your mobile phones or anything on with you, can you make sure they're turned to silent so they're not picked up in any shape or form? Okay, if we go to the agenda, item 1 is apologies for absence. Do we have any apologies for absence?
All members are present, Chair.
Thank you, Gareth. Item 2 of the agenda is minutes of the meeting of the 17th of June 2024 for correctness only. Are there any comments on the correctness? If not, someone prepared to move that they're a correct record, please. Thank you, Nigel. Can I have a seconder?
Councillor Hooper, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Hooper. Anyone against? No. Thank you very much. Item 3 on the agenda is declarations of interest. Do we have any declarations of interest?
None in the chamber, Chair.
No one indicated. Thank you very much. The agenda is the Vale de Morgan Council Annual Audit Summary 2023. I assume that's Tom. Okay. Tom, are you deal with item 4?
Yes, certainly, Chair. Thank you very much indeed. Good evening, committee members. This is a reference from the Council's Cabinet. It was also referred to Corporate Performance and Resources Committee yesterday evening. It's a bit of a housekeeping report, members, presenting the Auditor General for Wales's annual audit summary for this Council. It outlines the work that was undertaken since the last audit summary was provided back in March of 2023. Contents of the report, which are Appendix A to the reference, are generally positive. Some key conclusions that were drawn through Audit Wales's work: the audit of the accounts. The Auditor General for Wales gave an unqualified, true and fair opinion, as members will know, of the financial statements for 22-23, and confirmed that the annual governance statement and the associated narrative report were both prepared in line with the SIPFA code and relevant guidance. There were 11 recommendations made in relation to specific local reviews by Audit Wales of this council. As a committee, you've seen these come through the year following consideration by scrutiny committees, but for completeness, the 11 recommendations broken down: 2 from the use of performance information report, 5 the digital strategy review, 2 from the application of the sustainable development principle in service areas, and then finally 2 recommendations of the review into the planning services governance arrangements. In line with our performance management arrangements, as committee know, consideration is given to each of those reports by relevant scrutiny committees where Audit Wales present their findings and the relevant director presents the council's response. That then comes on to your committee for oversight and then on to Cabinet for approval. Throughout the year, we monitor the progress that is being made against these, and we've got the end of year position report later on in the agenda, members, where I'll give you an update as at the end of the year. That was all I was going to draw attention to, other than to mention that the appendix also includes some of the work relating to the coming year. So Audit Wales colleagues always undertake an assurance and risk assessment process of the organisation, looking at areas that perhaps they want to do some further work locally on, as well as undertaking the thematic reviews relating to financial sustainability and commissioning. So this is being brought to your committee this evening, members. As I say, went to Corporate Performance and Resources Committee, who noted the report yesterday evening. Any views from yourselves would be referred to Cabinet for their final oversight.
Hello, Chair, are you there, please?
I am. Thank you, Tom, for that. Are there any questions from members?
Nothing in the chair.
Any
in the chamber, Chair. No questions from the chamber.
Thank you. No, I can't see anything on screen. Are there any comments from anyone? Only one comment from me, Tom, in regard to the planning recommendations which came through. Clearly, if you're going to pick them up a little later on, but I didn't read it anywhere. But I think we're still awaiting a report back on the is it the planning policy or the procedure or whatever? But I don't think we've had anything as of yet. So it'd be just interesting to know at some stage when we're going to get that.
Thank you, Chair. Councillor Goodjohn asked a similar question yesterday evening at committee, and I've undertaken to get some further information relating to that particular aspect of the planning review. So I'll make sure that once I receive it, I'll share that with members of your committee as well as corporate performance and resources, if that's acceptable for members.
Yeah, that's. I think that would be great, Tom. Hopefully you're picking me up. That would be great. Subject to there being no other comments, we go to the recommendation that we note the contents of the audit summary 23, and obviously just picking up that point in regards to the planning recommendations, they be referred back to Cabinet for consideration. Someone prepared to be moved, please? Thank you, Councillor Norman. Can I have someone to second?
Yeah, Councillor Goodjohn, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Goodjohn. Anyone against? No, thank you. That's carried. Next item is item 5, which is the corporate risk report. I assume Tom again.
Apologies, you will get a break from me shortly, Chair. Yeah, thank you very much indeed. This is the usual quarterly risk report, but it does 3 things this evening for members. So we've presented the end of year position of the corporate risk register. Secondly, there's a proposed new risk register for the 24-25 year that's found in Appendix B. And then also in Appendix C and D, some information relating to some updates that have correspondingly been made to the Council's risk policy. I don't know whether, Chair, if you'd like me to go through each of those aspects one by one to allow members to ask questions after each. Perhaps it might be easier for members of the committee if I did that. So in terms of the end of year risk position, that's presented in Appendix A as usual for you members in terms of the risk summary report. 6 risks scoring high, 5 scoring medium high, 4 medium, and 1 medium low on the register. During the 4th quarter, there's not been any movement in terms of risks on the register. In terms of the forecast directions of travel, direction of travel for the legislative change and local government reform risk is forecast to reduce. There's some information relating to the rationale for that, and also no change to the integrated health and social care risk. So that's set to diminish in terms of the risk reducing over time because of the work that is underway becoming more business as usual. There are 3 risks that are on the register, members, that are forecast to increase or escalate over time. They relate to workforce, Project Zero, and information security. All of the other risks that are on the register as at the end of the year are forecast to remain static, and within Appendix A there's a paragraph updating members on the kind of current position of that risk for members to consider. So that's a really quick overview of the risk register as at the end of the year. I don't know whether any members have got any questions at this point, Chair.
I Chair, Councillor Prothero and Councillor Hooper have indicated they'd like to speak.
Shall I come in first or shall I wait? What do you want me to do, Gary?
I can see that we've actually lost the chair. So Nigel, Island, you're prepared to step in and to get Gareth back?
Yeah, that's fine. No problem. So, yeah, Councillor Prothero, did you want to come in then?
Yes, thank you. I just want to make a point, and it's a concern of mine. Procurement reform is a pretty substantial change to the legislation. Welsh Government has advised all local authorities to put that as an item on their risk register. I understand it's mentioned along with local government reform and legislative changes, but you've got it as a reducing risk, when really it's not a reducing risk, not the procurement reform part. And because it's a complete overhaul of the public sector procurement regs, and it includes spend from £30,000 upwards, it isn't something that Ardil will just pick up for us. So we really need to have, I guess, a closer eye on this. And I think it should be on the corporate risk register as an item in its own capacity. Thank you.
Tom, did you want to respond on that one? Oh, and Gareth, I'll hand back to you as you're back, Gareth.
Thank you, Nigel, and thank you, Councillor.
Sorry about that.
No problem. Thank you, Chair. Councillor Prothero was just asking about the significant procurement reform which is coming into play either later on in this year or early in 2025. And I'd be happy to take that away, Councillor Prothero, and have a look at whether it needs to be on the new risk register as a risk in its own right, or perhaps what we look at doing is, as a leadership team, having a look back at that legislative change risk. This paper was published prior to recent political changes, so it might be that actually there are some other things that will be coming down the track in terms of change in terms of legislation that would impact on the organisation. So it might be when we look at Appendix B to the report, the proposed new risks, that this is something that we give some further consideration before we bring that formally back to you at Q1 reporting. And certainly, if the committee were minded to, in terms of expressing that concern and those views back to Cabinet for when they consider the end of year risk position.
Thank you, Tom. It's definitely has to be a recommendation of mine, whether the committee support it, but it is, Welsh Government has said it should be on our risk register, and having started the formal rollout of training, I can see how far-reaching these changes are, and that it isn't just tenders and high-value exercises. It's almost everything, really. As I said, over 30,000 is a covered procurement. So thanks ever so much anyway.
Thanks, Councillor Prothero. I think you stole my thunder there. I was going to say, whilst Tom and the management team may wish to go and have a little look at it, I think given it's a recommendation coming out from Welsh Government, and certainly the concern you've expressed being a practitioner in the field, I think we ought to recommend to Cabinet that it is put on the risk register for next in the new risk register as a separate item. And I would hope, certainly I would support you on a recommendation should that come forward when we make the recommendations. Are there any other questions?
Councillor Hooper, Chair.
Sorry, Gareth.
Councillor Hooper in the chamber, Chair, would like to speak.
Go on, Councillor Hooper.
Thank you, Chair. I sometimes feel like a broken record when we talk about Project Zero. It's just interesting the words that are being used. It feels like we are clearly on a path to a catastrophic rating on this one. And I worry about why are we not taking that step? Is it the optics? Because if it is, I think that would be a mistake. I think to tell the rest of the people of the Vale of Glamorgan that this is something that we are extremely worried about and need to get more resources into is something that is appropriate. 2030 is 6 years away. I think if we were more honest with each other, I think we'd say that this was catastrophic today. So I don't know why we're delaying what feels like the inevitable. I'd like to push that one back. I feel like we're saying this every time, and I know that other councillors say the same thing.
Thank you, Councillor Hooper.
Tom.
Thank you, Chair. Absolutely, and I can assure members that following each of the Governance and Audit Committee considerations of the risk register, we always then do report the risk back and the feedback back from the committee, Councillor Hooper, to the Project Zero board. I think well, I know what has been driving the decision to keep it in that very high, but with a forward trajectory, is that we are still exploring the amount of work that needs to be done. I think there are two key pieces of work that will happen now in the next couple of months that will give us a much greater insight into the extent of that work that needs to happen and therefore the risk of not achieving it. One is the publication of the carbon management plan that's going to come to Cabinet immediately after the recess, and that will set some targets, more specific targets in terms of carbon reduction, and importantly relating to Councillor Prothero's point earlier around the procurement aspects and the ability to affect the reduction or decarbonisation of our supply chain. And secondly then is the latest submission of data back to Welsh Government. That's being compiled currently to be submitted in the next few weeks, and we'll get the analysis of that in the early autumn. That will give us then the third of a more comparable set of data over a period of time. But I think the board is very cognizant of the feedback of this committee and in fact discussions that officers have, which is what's reflected in that upward trajectory in terms of the direction of travel. So it's really waiting for that data, and I think at that point that's what informs that discussion.
Thanks, Tom. With your forbearance, Chair, can I just come back on that, if you don't mind? You're very pixelated, so I don't know whether that was a nod or not then. It was a nod, was it? Thank you. I think the point that I'm wanting to push home here is that if we were to change this rating and recognise the severity of it, it would force the council and others who are supporting the council financially, particularly Welsh Government and maybe UK Government now as well, to recognise that the resources need to be deployed in this area today, because the longer we take, the harder it's going to be. And I feel like, I do fear that we're worried about how this would look outside, and that would be the worst thing to happen, and probably indicate a real failure of management and the politics of this concerning issue as well. So I'd like that to be put on record. I think it should be reviewed again, and I think it should be reviewed again with a view to getting significantly more resources. And we had, I think it was this committee, it might have been ENR actually, where I challenged the officer who's responsible for it, and I said, there's just not enough money here, and it's clear there isn't enough money to do the job we need to do. So we need to change that. We have now a new UK government that's Labour government. We have a Labour Welsh government, and we have a Labour administration here as well. We really need to make sure we're pushing. If there are open doors, they need to be pushed.
Thanks, Councillor. Are there any other questions?
Councillor Goodjohn, Chair.
Councillor Goodjohn?
Oh, there we go. Thank you. Yes, two questions here. I'll start with just on the point that Mark was making just then, that, look, Tom, when it comes to Project Zero, I understand the fear of increasing the risk rate when we don't know the full scope. But every time that and I hate to keep talking about it, every time that the carbon management plan has been delayed has made me more fearful of what the actual risk is when it comes to this item. And you and I both know, if we're being honest, that the submission of data to the Welsh Government doesn't reflect the actual situation on the ground of our carbon output, because of how much it is based on cost. And I understand that we want to kind of hide away from the actual situation, but if we don't know the full journey we have to make to be net zero, and we don't at this time, but hopefully this plan that's coming out in September will help. If we don't know the full situation, and we haven't for a year and a half, that this was meant to be out for, this was meant to be out a year and a half ago, how much time have we lost in that journey when we're making small steps, but is it the right steps? And are they good enough? We don't know yet. And the Project Zero updates have been helpful, but I don't think we can honestly say that we are in a position where there is any mitigation of the risk apart from the Project Zero Insight Board and the Project Zero Reserve, which is a good start. But is that enough to really say we're mitigating this risk and it's not likely to fail, and that it's not going to have a catastrophic impact on the way that this council runs if we fail to hit our target and we fail to hit the targets that we've been set by national government? So I would support Councillor Hooper here and ask you, are there any mitigating factors you think which mean that we shouldn't? What is the case for not increasing the risk rate here?
Thank you, Councillor Goodjohn. In terms of that piece of work that you described in terms of the carbon management plan, the reason for me suggesting that that's a really critical thing for us to do, and I apologise that it's been delayed in bringing it to members, and sincerely apologise for the delay. But I think when you see it, it's far more detailed than in the past when those things were introduced, a decade or so ago. They pretty much related to the council's office accommodation, other buildings, street lighting, that kind of thing. Because we know it's such a much more wide-ranging plan that's required, it's taken a lot of time and a lot of effort by a lot of colleagues to be able to put that piece of work together and to set targets that are aligned with that data submission to Welsh Government. And the reason for suggesting that it's important, I think, that we have that data return, and you're right that a lot of it is based on notional, financially driven values to get a carbon equivalent. But what it's importantly doing is showing us the trend in our carbon emissions over time in a comparable way, and that's something that we haven't had before. And it's no criticism of anybody or anything, but having that data that we can compare year on year, so that we can see the actions that we're taking as an organisation and therefore the impact that it's having, is something that I think is an important evidence base for how we take things forward. So it's those two pieces of work together that I think will give us a greater understanding of where the actions that we need to take are that will have that greatest impact. So that's the reason for suggesting that once we've got that, I think we would be in a much better position to say, in reality, within the next 5.5 years, are we going to be able to meet that risk? And therefore, is that escalation happening now or in the future? And that's where the report is sitting currently.
If I may, Chair, my second question was on social care, which is that on the proposed future corporate risk, we've got 5 different risks on social care that's all being merged into one, now knowing that most of them are not particularly high risks, but understanding, for example, the financial fragility that we've seen in social care with overspends of in the millions that has taken the variance, the favourable variance of the rest of the council to try and make up for. Is it right to put all social care risks into one in the future? because I don't want to come into a situation where we have only, I believe it's 11 risks on the new proposed register, and they're all too high to really understand which ones to prioritise and which ones not to. So is there any rationale as to why all of the social care risks are being put in one, and do we think that's going to be too much for one category?
Thank you, Councillor Goodjohn. In terms of the work, and I'll come on to this in a moment for committee members, but for me, there are two distinct social services related risks being proposed in the new register. The one around the connected care, that WICIS related risk that I know as a committee, but that's a very specific system-based risk, as committee members know, and I think that does warrant being on the new register. What we have seen is the market fragility and the demand and capacity risks that are on the current register. They're almost two halves of the same whole at the moment. So what we're suggesting in the new register is that actually there is a significant risk in social care relating to demand and capacity. And that we feel that needs to be recognised within the register. The financial implications of the council settlement, but also the implications of that demand would be then reflected in that financial fragility risk, the financial resources risk. So presenting that as a whole, alongside learning and skills, place, environment and housing, and the corporate financing as well.
Yeah, if I can come back on that quickly, it's things like unauthorised deprivation of liberty has to be in somewhere in the risk register, and that would come under social care, and so would 5 whole risks at the moment. Again, none of them are enormous, but it's just if you're having to put so many different risks under one category, just the point of, is that too much? Does that need to be split apart? Any thoughts on that would be helpful.
Certainly, and thank you, Councillor. I think it's a really good point, and through the deliberation on the proposed 11 new corporate risks, and as I say, I'll take away the comments obviously of the committee as well if you recommend for us to look at that procurement and legislation based risk. The rationale is about being able to prioritise on the highest level risks for the organisation, and what we've found as well is that the current number of risks on the register vary in their kind of interrelatedness as well. So sometimes when I'm talking and presenting the report to yourselves around financial fragility, I'm almost stealing the thunder of some of the social care demand aspects. So what we've tried to do is almost bring together the like elements of the risks in order that we can propose them with more clarity. I would give assurance, though, that aspects such as unauthorised deprivation of liberty safeguards and safeguarding, whilst they may not be on the corporate risk register, that doesn't mean that they wouldn't sit within our service risk management process, and the kind of the work that we do through leadership team and the insight board means that we're constantly scanning that risk environment, and if, for example, something happened that made us feel that actually it was becoming more of a corporate level risk, absolutely we would be bringing that back to your committee and recommending that it goes back onto the register.
Thank you.
Thank you, Tom. I apologise, I take my picture off. Councillor Wood.
Hello, Councillor Wood. If you press your request to speak button.
Yeah. If I could just clarify, the data submission has gone to the Welsh Government and I think it was mentioned last night in corporate performance, we're expecting it back, or some data or some sort of analysis returned early, just after the recess, is that correct? And will that give us some sort of starting point for us to be able to see how we've been performing and what issues we tackle next, or where are we sitting in terms of the submissions and the plan to go forward in the next year or two to actually try to get close to this target for 2030?
Thank you, Councillor Wood. The submission to Welsh Government will go in during August. We're currently compiling that data from across the organisation. We're expecting then to receive that back from Welsh Government in terms of the analysis and the data presented in a way that we can use again during September. We're not waiting though for that data to come before we're taking any further action, as members would expect. And when we bring the carbon management plan to Cabinet and to committees after the recess, you'll also see links back to work that is underway already. So it's really giving us that data to show some of the impact of the work that we're having, which is what I'm referring to, and that will then inform the next steps that we will want to take and the areas that we want to concentrate on. So data submission during August, and then the receipt back of that particular report in September. Carbon management plan to Cabinet, first meeting after the recess, and then on to committees during September or into early October, depending on the cycle of committee meetings.
Okay. All right. Well, I look forward to seeing how we're doing. It's going to be interesting, I think.
Thanks, Councillor Wood. Are there any other questions? Tom, I thought if I just take advantage, obviously the risk in regards to information security and such like is on the corporate risk register at the moment. But I was reading in the press before I came away the issues surrounding breaches of data protection legislation and the amount of compensation that the council has had to pay out in regards to these data breaches. Are they being picked up in information security or under data issues?
Thank you, Chair. Yes, absolutely. Information and cyber security would be irrespective of the type of data or the format that it's held within. And both are regular topics on the Council's Information Governance Board, which looks at data breaches alongside cyber security incidents on a monthly basis.
Okay, the score is fairly low, those it's only in the line, but clearly, as long as someone's keeping away the time. You need to go, if there are no other questions on that part of the report, Tom, do you want to go on to the next new risk register?
Certainly, thank you very much, Chair. So, as just mentioning when we were discussing around those social care risks, and that's a really good example, Councillor Goodjohn, of the work that we've been doing over the last few months. So, Strategic Insight Board, Strategic Leadership Team have been undertaking a review of the risk register, and also then reflecting that within the Council's risk policy. And what's become clear, as I was mentioning earlier, that it's become increasingly complex and interrelated in terms of the nature of those risks. I know from some of the discussions that we've had at this committee that members have questioned as well the balance of risks against things that are impacting the organisation and then also impacting on the community. So we've taken a review of that whole kind of landscape and looked to refresh the register, and that's what's in Appendix B is the proposed risk register. It's got some rationale within each of those proposed risks. The purpose of bringing it this evening is very much to engage early on in that process with Governance and Audit Committee members to get initial comments and feelings, and obviously Councillor Goodjohn and Councillor Prothero have shared some that are pertinent to it. What we're proposing to do is subject to your consideration and then to Cabinet is over this summer we will work up those risks by scoring them, doing the analysis of those risks, and we'll use the new template in Appendix D to this report to do that. We've sought to try and streamline that. I know we don't provide the full background papers to yourselves at each committee for convenience, but that's an important part of the risk management process internally. But in response to feedback from our colleagues, we've looked to do some streamlining and simplifying of that. So they're the proposed risks within the risk register. We have given some thought, obviously, to the level and moderation of those risks, but bringing them this evening for you to see and comment on.
Thank you, Tom. Are there any questions on the new risk register and the data?
Councillor Hooper, Chair.
Councillor Hooper?
Thank you, Chair, and thanks, Tom. Firstly, I'd like to agree with both Councillor Prothero and Councillor Goodjohn's comments earlier. They were both points that I was intending to make. I'm just interested in particular, just diving into a little bit, the delivery of major regeneration projects. I sit on E&R Scrutiny Committee, and I've asked on several occasions as to how these projects are going. This tends to indicate to me that there is significant concern within the council about whether or not we're going to hit the timescales of both of these projects, both the £20 million projects. I don't know what you can say now, Tom, but I'd just be interested into why, maybe a bit of background, just the discussion as to why this one's in here. Thanks.
Thank you, Councillor Hooper. I wouldn't describe it as us being unduly concerned, but what we are very aware of is that there are different time periods associated, as you know, and members are aware of in terms of spending this money. There's also a huge amount of benefit that we can deliver as a result of these regeneration projects if the council and our partners deliver them successfully. And there's also a lot of expectation from residents that we do that. When we were looking at the risk register as officers at leadership team, we had a discussion around, does this aspect of the council's work, which is so significant because, as you say, the £220 million investment, does that fit within that financial fragility or financial resources risk? And it didn't feel as if it felt as if it might become a little lost in just that risk, and that actually there are different kind of components to this, one of which is, you've mentioned, is the timescale. One is the financial value of them. And thirdly, I'd say, is the impact that we can have if we deliver them on time, on budget, and get them right for the residents. So that was the rationale from an officer perspective to suggesting including them on the register.
Thank you, Tom. Any other questions?
Matthew Evans, Chair.
Matthew?
Thank you, Chair. Nice quick one from me, Tom. I guess when I was looking through, I was probably surprised to not see something specific on change. And I guess from your comments so far, it's probably inherent within some of the other risks. So I guess from that, what's your structure of control to say where those risks such as change purvey across a number of different risks? How do you know you're not carrying a level of inherent risk across risks, if I'm making sense, that is not unsustainable for the council?
Thank you, Matthew. And I would see it in exactly that way, that predominantly in terms of internal change, we would see that being reported through the financial resources and that workforce risk. So almost the financial environment in which we're having to adapt and change potentially playing in the committee's views around that legislative environment piece as well. But certainly then that organisation, that workforce and organisation change is about the ability for us to tool up our colleagues in order to be able to deliver that change. So that's where I would see that that being reflected. And in terms then of the process for us monitoring how those things are going, that's the step that's really useful when we take this to leadership team, because in effect the Insight Board have gone through and had a look at, after risk owners update their individual risks, and we do a bit of, are we comfortable with the direction of travel? The leadership team then almost do a bit of a moderation piece to make sure that we're accurately reflecting the various different aspects of things. I'll mention in a moment some the major addition to the risk policy around risk appetite, and I think that's a useful tool for us to use now as we define these new risks as well, and that will help us to tease out that theme around how willing we are to take certain risks.
Thank you, Tom. Are there any other questions? No? Do we go on to the part 2 then? Tom, is that what you want to pick up next? The risk management policies as well?
Thank you, Chair. And yes, and apologies, members. I know I've been hogging the limelight this evening so far. But the final bit I just wanted to mention was around the risk policy. We've taken a look at the risk policy for a couple of reasons. One, it's a couple of years since we've had a look at it, so we needed to just make sure that it was up to date in terms of some of the terminology of groups, names, and job titles, etc. But we also had a piece of work that was done by internal audit colleagues, and one of the recommendations arising from that was that we should consider the council's risk appetite. So I just wanted to draw attention to the committee really to paragraph 2.3 of the risk policy. That sets out how we would look at adopting the civil service approach to risk appetite. And what we've set out in effect is a series of different appetite levels, ranging from being opposed to enterprising and 3 stages in between. And what the policy is doing is taking each of the 4 risk categories, so members will be aware of the political and legislative, resources, service delivery and wellbeing and reputation aspects that we use to define risks. And what we've set out is, in effect, an appetite statement. So we've said, for example, within political and legislative categories, we're opposed to taking risks that potentially would lead to non-compliance with legislation, regulatory safeguarding risks. We're opposed to any risks associated with breaches of ethics, fraud, etc. So as you'd expect, of a local authority, there are certain things that we absolutely won't do, and we won't tolerate risk on. There are some things in some instances, however, where we would adopt a different level of risk, and the purpose of doing this, as suggested by internal audit colleagues, is really just to explore the nuances within some of the risks in a different way. What we would look to do is reflect this within the definition of each of the risks, which is in that template at Appendix D over the summer, and it's just a useful additional layer for risk owners to use. So that was just I wanted to make sure that the committee saw the updated risk policy and just drew your attention to that particular aspect of the work that we've been doing.
Thank you, Tom. I noticed Nigel question.
Thank you, Chair. Thanks for this, Tom. It's a really good policy. I think there's a lot in there. I think there is a risk of overcomplicating it, would be just a note to make, and it has got some good guidance in there, but it is quite complicated. I just had a few questions. Firstly, I really welcome that bit on risk appetite. That's kind of, I hate to say it, but the easy bit. The next bit is how do you bring that appetite and make it useful? How do you bring it to life? So I look forward to future reporting where that risk appetite is referenced. so that we can see it in terms of why risks are being managed or risk assessed in a certain way. Two other quick queries. 2.2.1 in the table at the bottom of page 11, just in the table there, you've got likelihood 3, impact 3, and then the inherent risk is still 3. I think that's supposed to be a 9, just to bring that one to your attention. I'm going to come on to questions, but I thought I'd get out the easy ones first of all. At the bottom of page 17, under section 3, risk management roles and responsibilities, there's a bit on internal audit, and the paragraph ends in whilst. And I assume there's either supposed to be something after that or something was deleted. So just to correct that. My two main questions are, I struggle a bit because I'm not on the council and I don't go to the some of the other committees and things like that. Some of the risks when I read them are very new to me, or I have to base my understanding on what is given to me in the papers. And as a result of that, I struggle a bit with the definitions. And then when I read your policy, I noticed that your risk definition is basically something bad that happens to the council. And when I look through the rest of the document, so things like 1.2 talking about the impact on objectives, 4.1 talks about the impact on our priorities, and lots of references made to our objectives, that's more aligned to what I would see as normal good practice, which is a definition of risk around the uncertainty of an event that could impact on the achievement of the council's objectives. And that, if we framed it in that way, the writing of risks would then tie into your objectives and make them easier to understand and probably risk assess as well. So I wanted to ask whether you felt that the definition of risk was correct in the policy, or whether that could be looked at. And following on from that, section 2.1 is about, sorry, let me just find it, identifying and defining risks, but there isn't actually anything on defining risks. And I wonder whether we could add a little bit in there about defining risks in terms of cause and effect and relating it back to the council's objectives, and bring that into Appendix D as well, so that explanation was there, so that it would tie it back to the objectives. But for somebody just reading it sort of almost cold, it would make it more understandable in terms of what's the actual impact we're worried about. And going back to the Councillor Hooper's comments and Councillor Goodjohn's comment about things like Project Zero and the care services, things like that, social care, I think it would make it clearer why we should be concerned about a risk. So I just would like your perspective on that, and particularly the risk definition. But there's those two main questions, if I can, please.
Thank you, Nigel, certainly, and thank you for the spotting of a couple of typos and stuff as well, because I can definitely make sure that they're corrected. In terms of the initial question around the definition of risk, I think now listening to your feedback in terms of potentially the complexity, certainly of this document, that perhaps some of that has been lost in translation in terms of that those first few introductory sections. So I think it's really useful feedback, and I think we're both on the same page in the sense of what that definition is. But I think because we're in effect using 3 sections in that introductory bit to define it, perhaps the actual definition has got lost in words. So if committee were going to suggest that we maybe simplify that wording in order to hone in, I think that is certainly something that we can do. And then in terms of the definition piece that you mentioned, Nigel, at 2.1 in the policy, I think the risk categories that are set out in that table 1 are how we would look to approach the definition of each of those risks. So looking from those 4 different facets of risk in order to be able to define specifically what the risk relates to. And thank you for welcoming the appetite piece, because I think by us having that appetite associated with each of those risk categories, what it means is that we can present what the tolerable level of risk and our approach to that level of risk would be in the definition itself. So certainly I think we can simplify the initial definition. I think it's there, but I think it's maybe lost in words. And secondly, maybe take on board your feedback as we do that definition piece. We can then bring those back at Q1 for you to have a look at, and maybe we can explore that once we've done that piece of work, perhaps.
Yeah, thank you, Tom. That would be great, and I'm more than happy to catch up offline if I can be useful there in terms of why I'm slightly confused by the definition and therefore what I think might make it a bit simpler, because I kind of do that on a day-to-day basis. So happy to feed in if I can be of some use in relation to that, and particularly just making sure that opportunity side of risk, it comes across when you first read that first line, it just comes across as really negative, and then you read the rest of the document and it talks about opportunities and upsides and all those sorts of things. I think as a starting point, yeah, it's just kind of missed the point that you then go on to do for the rest of it. So if I can help, please let me know.
Thank you, Nigel. I'm sure Tom will take you up on that. Are there any other questions from anyone?
Councillor Hooper, Chair.
Councillor Hooper?
Thanks, Chair. And I'm also pleased we've got risk appetite section in here. There's a language issue that I'd just like to draw your attention to, because I think it concerns me because it leads somewhere and I'm not really sure where it leads to. So we use the word enterprise, and an enterprise is something that is established to make money. And it's the way that this word creeps into a public service delivery thing, it really concerns me, because we've had local authorities, some close to home, that have invested in retail parks that are outside of their area in terms of making money. We've had some further away who invest in commercial banks and lost all their money on a commercial bank. And when you put the word enterprise in here, it leads you to that conclusion. And language is really important. It's really important in things like this. And I think this ends up being quite pervasive. So I'd encourage us just to find other words to describe us taking more risks with things over a longer term. I've seen it throughout my time in this council, where we talk about this council being a business. It's not a business. It's delivering public services. And I think we need to get back to that. And maybe I'm being a bit old school, but I think we miss the trick if we're not careful. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Hooper, and certainly not old timer at all. I think it is important, the language that we use when we're talking about risk. We've lifted this from some of the central government guidance that is associated with risk management. But in this context, my understanding is that it's about taking more of an innovative approach to things, being open to doing things in different ways. And if you're reading that differently, that means that we need to address that issue of that language. And I think it's something that is important that we get right. And I can certainly take it away and make sure that there's a more appropriate word that's used in there. And if we can't find that we absolutely properly define what we mean by enterprising in this context. And like you, I don't describe us as a business either.
Thank you, Tom. Are there any other questions? No? Any comments? I think we've given this a good... Councillor Prothero.
It's a comment and an observation when I just look at the risks that we've got here. Almost all of them are things that are within our scope of responsibility, if you see what I mean, bar one, which is the cost of living. And I don't know, it just feels a little bit odd to me. I mean, obviously the cost of living impacts on our financial position and our financial fragility, but it's the only one out of all of those that really isn't something that we can impact on ourselves directly. So I'm just wondering, should it have its own risk? That's all. Thank you.
That's Councillor Prothero. Tom?
Thank you, Councillor Prothero. just getting to the right section, that's the one that we are proposing in the new risk register that wouldn't sit as a separate standalone risk, and actually for exactly the reason that you have just set out, because what we're looking to try and do is make sure that the risks that are on the council's risk register from the beginning of this year are those things that directly impact, and we have more direct levels of control over. The aspects, though, of the cost of living crisis would be reflected within financial resources, and also across various other more service-specific risks. And within the definition there around service delivery and well-being, that particular aspect. So it's a good example of why we're looking to try and hone things in a little bit more than we have done in the past.
Thank you, Tom. Sorry if I've picked up something that you've already covered. I thought I was looking at the new risk register suggested one, so sorry about that.
Thanks, Councillor. Is Councillor Good, Tom Waite there for?
Correct, Chair.
Yeah, thank
Yes.
you. Thank you, Chair. Just to say reasonably quickly that what I'm hoping that this doesn't become is a list of what is the overall grouping of risks that has the highest risk. This should still include individual risks within it, and well, social care has the highest amount of risk compared to corporate performance. That's not, in my understanding at least, what we're trying to achieve here. Let's make sure that we're not grouping too many things together. That's my main comment. Off the back of social care and other things that have been grouped together here, let's make sure we're including individuals alongside groups of risks, so we're not losing that kind of grounding in what this is, because otherwise you might as well put up the service plan risks altogether and say which document is the worst. The one other thing I wanted to say is this document has taken a battering today, but I would hope I speak on everyone when I say this is a positive change. And although we want to see other changes within the document, this is positive to see. I particularly really like digital being within there, because that not being there in the past when, for example, Oracle has come up, there's clearly been a weakness in digital within the organisation. And this is really positive to see that being taken forward directly and by the new head of digital. And housing and homelessness, which in of itself, if we don't tackle pretty quickly, could bankrupt the council, frankly, with the kind of pressures we're seeing. So having that on the new risk register is really good to see, and to see the changes overall, I think, are quite positive. But yes, give it some amendments before coming back to us, please.
Thanks, Councillor John. I don't think, well, I don't know one sees these sources of destructive criticism, but sees it as very much constructive criticism. And the reason why we're here as Governance and Audit Committee, seeking that assurance in regards to the risk register. Are there any other comments? No, if there are no other comments, further recommendations then. Recommendation one is that we note the quarter four position of the corporate risks outlined in the risk summary report Annex A. Two, we endorse the new corporate risk register and risk management policy, including the support and risk 10 items suggest, subject to recommendation 3, which is to pick up all the issues that have been raised during the constructive discussion we've had this evening. Firstly, the risk around the procurement risk and recommendation from central government. The issues surrounding Project Zero.
Sorry, Chair. You're breaking up quite a bit there, Chair. We're not actually hearing much what you're saying. But would it be better if you're trying to leave and rejoin?
Okay. Try again.
Just bear with us. Okay, we're just waiting for the chair to rejoin us, and we'll resume when the chair's back with us. Hello, Gareth, are you there, please? Hello, Chair.
Is that any better, Gareth?
It is much better, yes. Thank you.
Right.
If you go back to the recommendations, Chair, we'll pick up from there, please.
Right, hang on a minute. Let me get the agenda up. Yeah, sorry. The recommendation was number one that we note the Q4 position of the corporate risk, April 23 to March 24, outlined in the risk summary report, Annex A. Recommendation 2, we endorse the proposed new risk register and risk management policy, including the supporting risk template. Subject to recommendation 3, which is firstly the issues surrounding the procurement risk being raised, that was raised by Councillor Prothero, being included in the new risk register. Secondly, the Cabinet to look at Project Zero again as to whether it's got the right risk score and actually should be increased to, I think it's the catastrophic stage. That the social services, the social care risks be looked at in regard to separating them out where appropriate and if required. Next one is regarding to the definition of risk. Needs to be looked at in the new policy. The other one is that the definition of risk regarding cause and effect in paragraph 2.1 of new policy being looked at. And finally, that the risk management policy be looked at in respect of the language being used and the misinterpretation of some of the terminology.
Thank you, Chair.
Yes, Gareth.
I think Councillor Hooper may have a comment on the recommendations. No, it's all covered. That's fine, Chair. It's all good. Thank you.
Good. I hope I haven't missed anything. So is someone prepared to move those recommendations, please?
Councillor Hooper, Councillor Ireland, Nigel Ireland and Councillor Goodjohn, Chair. I've got plenty. Thanks.
That's lovely. Thank you very much. Anyone object? No, thank you. Thank you for the discussion on that item. Next one is the unaudited statement of accounts 23-24. I should expect to go to Matt for that. Oh, no, Gemma.
Hello, good evening. Thank you for having me. This report, you'll be used to seeing attempts to do a few different things. So it brings you the unaudited statement of accounts for the Vale Glamorgan Council. It also brings before you the unaudited statement of accounts for the Shared Regulatory Service, which of course has already been to the Joint Committee at the end of June, and the annual return for the Vale, Valleys and Cardiff Regional Adoption Service, which is slightly different from last year because last year you had a full set of accounts. In addition, the audit plan is also appended to this report. So I'll briefly take you through the various sets of accounts, but I'll also hand you over to Audit Wales to take you through the audit plan. I think colleagues Stephen and Sarah are both on the call. Okay, so in terms of the main accounts, just to quickly summarise the management accounts position, but of course that will come before you in more detail as part of the outturn report. So I think throughout the year there were pressures projected in terms of social services, homelessness, school transport, and some pressures in neighbourhood services, and also in respect of delivery of savings in the Place Directorate. There was also an expectation communicated as part of the Q3 monitoring that those overspends would be offset to a certain extent by policy. At outturn, I think certainly the overspends are offset by to a greater extent by policy, and that's in part because investment income and benefit from internal borrowing was greater than had been projected throughout the year, but also council tax arrears reduced more significantly than we had projected. And I think we had some quite prudent estimates in terms of the benefit of empty homes in year in terms of the council tax collection. The provision for bad debts for council tax was also reduced. So we had some quite significant surpluses in policy that enabled us to offset those overspends across the service. Doesn't mean that those services, those cost pressures don't continue to exist, and we won't continue to experience them in 24-25. So we did see a reduction in reserves of 34 million. And that in part, a significant part of that was the housing revenue account drawdown. So that was around 13 million. And we had projected a larger drawdown. And that reduction in drawdown was to take account of the risk within the wider housing business plan. And so it was felt that a slightly higher amount would be prudent. And so we retained 3.5 million in the housing revenue account reserve. And this will continue to be kept under review as part of the housing business plan process. In terms of the general fund, there was a slightly reduced drawdown of 417,000. We planned for just short of 500,000, and that was because we had a small residual surplus. And then the balance was a movement on earmarked reserves. We also had smaller movements against capital receipts and capital grants and applied in terms of the usable reserves, as you'll see them within the main statements. In terms of capital expenditure, I think strong progress was made in terms of delivering the capital programme. There was some slippage, but there is significant amounts of expenditure, and that's largely down to the expenditure on sustainable communities for learning and in respect of the housing improvement programme. But there were some other significant schemes across the council as well. So in terms of the main accounts, I think the main headlines are the pension liability is reduced further significantly. So I think members remember we saw a significant reduction in the pension liability as part of the 22-23 accounts, and that has that trend has continued. I think some parts of the overall pension liability are actually pension assets. So but it is still a net liability for the council. And I know there are some other local authorities across Wales who are actually seeing a net pension asset now. So that follows a kind of national trend that we're seeing. In terms of other headlines within the accounts, I think there was a large amount of borrowing that matured in year. Some of that borrowing, none of that borrowing was replaced. There was some additional borrowing that was carried out in year, and that relates to the housing improvement programme. And that was largely in the context of continuing to see those really high rates for borrowing, and our reserves still staying a bit higher than perhaps we projected. So on balance, we were able to increase our internal borrowing. So our internal borrowing at year end stood at around 55 million. And that's obviously not a position that we'll be able to sustain going into 24-25. So we're really going to keep borrowing opportunities under review as we progress through the financial year. In terms of other kind of key things that I would want to draw your attention to in the main council accounts, I think we're seeing more members of staff hitting that over £60,000 banding. So you'll see that in those remuneration statements that there are more staff, and that's largely staff that were perhaps on the cusp in the high 50,000s maybe in 22-23 tipped over into just over 60,000 in the 23-24 accounts. In terms of the context of preparing the accounts, obviously this was the first year of accounts preparation using Oracle Fusion, and there were some hiccups, you know, some revisions to reports that were required. But I think on the whole, we got through and we kind of reconciled the elements that we needed to give us assurance over the accounts. There are also some other financial systems across the council that were implemented during 23-24 that also kind of contributed to the overall picture of how those accounts were pulled together. I think in terms of the new system that was implemented for managing building repairs, I think there's some work still to be done in terms of refining that year-end process. But I know the team are working very hard to make sure that we're in a better position for the 24 account, for 25 accounts. I also want to do some changes in process in terms of how we manage the information around where pieces of land have been disposed of or purchased, because I think that there's quite a lot of piecing together of that information through the closing process, and I think there's definitely scope to refine that going forward. As I say, we've had a number of new accountants and obviously a new system. And we did have some sickness during the process, but we were able to hit that end of June deadline, which was really important for us to make sure that we were in line with that overall Audit Wales timetable. I don't know whether you want to ask any questions that you have on the main Vale of Glamorgan Council accounts, and then I can move on to the other elements of the council, whether you want to just bring any questions at the end.
I'll be guided to the one and two minutes first.
Okay, so yes, I'm happy to take any questions.
Councillor Hooper, Chair.
Councillor Hooper.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Gemma, for that. I'm just interested, and I appreciate it's a relatively small figure in the scheme of things, but I think it's an important one just to talk through the exit packages and the differences year on year. So in 22-23, it was 215 grand in exit packages, and last year it was 883,000. Significant. 39 people exited the business. I said, here you go, Tom. Exited the council, as opposed to 7 the year before. I just wonder if you could give us a bit of explanation behind that. Thank you.
I think I have added a little bit more information below the note this year, just to provide the split between schools and corporate, because I think it's important to keep that element of it under the review. And we did have, as you'll be aware, significant pressures in schools in 23-24, and will continue to have significant pressures in schools. And there were a number of exit packages that were agreed as part of that process in terms of helping schools reach balanced budgets. The council is also seeking to deliver savings and restructuring teams corporately as well. And there are a number of exit arrangements, and I agree, over and above what we've seen in previous years in terms of those reorganisations of teams. And I think it, in context of the savings that we have in 24-25, whilst the council will always seek to avoid redundancy, and there are conversations about how we can widen those redeployment opportunities across the council, potentially a trend that we'll see, unfortunately, continue in this financial year as well.
Thanks, Gemma. Any other questions for Gemma on the main accounts? No? Okay. Gemma, on the bar.
Okay, thank you, Chair. So in terms of the shared regulatory services accounts, obviously this goes before joint committee for review. So very briefly, just to say that there is a reduction in usable reserves. Some of that is in a planned manner. So there are specific elements of the service that are being funded from reserves. There is a kind of historic funding unusual arrangement with the shared regulatory service in respect of authority-specific services, and therefore once the audit is complete, typically arrangements are then put in place to recover those overspends from the relevant partner authorities. And just a note to say that in line with the Vale accounts, the shared regulatory services accounts also have that significant reduction in pension liability in year. I'll also move on to the Regional Adoption Service if that's okay. So members will recall that last year full accounts were completed. I think we've done a bit more work with the Audit Wales technical team this year, and had clarification that regulations are that where the threshold is we go over the £2.5 million threshold, it's only if that's been for 3 years, I think, on a sustained basis. So in the context of that additional advice, we've taken the opportunity not to complete full accounts for 23-24. And our expectation is that with some of the savings that are being put forward in this service for 24-25, that full accounts may not be required next year as well. There is a small carry forward at year end, and the partner authorities are being consulted on the use of reserves. This service does have savings as well, though, so and are reliant on grant income, so it's likely that that reserve will need to be utilised as part of that approach going forward. So if there are any questions on those elements of the accounts, otherwise I can pick up the audit plan element.
Thanks, Gemma. Are there any questions on the 2 service areas? No? On the audit plan.
Okay, thank you very much. So I'll only talk about this very briefly, and then I'll hand over to my colleagues from Audit Wales. And I think members are typically used to seeing this as a standalone report. So apologies for any confusion that's been caused by that. So the audit plan from Audit Wales is attached to Appendix D. This sets out how Audit Wales will be delivering the Auditor General's responsibilities. And there is information like that, such as the fees that will be relevant for the period. But I know Steve and Sarah will take us through this if they're able to join. Thank you.
Thanks, Gemma. Over to you, Steve.
Okay, thank you, Chair, and good evening, everyone. Members will be quite familiar with this document, I feel. It's an annual document we bring to this committee, and it sets out our planned external audit work for the year for 2024. It encompasses financial audit and performance audit work. So this session, if you like, would be double-handed between myself, and I'll cover the financial audit aspects, and Sarah Jane, who will pick up some of the performance audit elements and also some other elements of the document. But before I start this, I should just draw your attention to the fact that page 5, there's a stray watermark on the document, unfortunately, that says draft. And I just want to confirm, really, that this is the final plan. It's not the draft document, as that watermark might suggest. So I just want to sort of clarify that particular point. But in terms of the actual document, I'll pick up on, as I say, on the financial audit aspects. And page 6 of the document of the audit plan sets out the scope, really, of our financial audit work at the council. And by far the biggest component of this is the audit of the council's accounts. You know, we've just been taken through that by Gemma. And it's probably a good opportunity, really, for me to comment on the state of play, I guess, in regard to that audit. You know, we have commenced the audit. The accounts were received on time, so far so good. And the other thing I'm pleased to say is, whilst it is early days, There's been no issues or any matters that have materialised yet from the audit to bring to this committee's attention. But of course, there is a lot of water to go under that bridge. There's still a lot of audit work to continue to go through, but that's the current sort of position in regard to our audit. The plan also outlines some of the other financial audit work we do at the council. As Gemma points out, she referred to the SRS Joint Committee accounts, the review we undertake of the adoption annual return, and also the examination of the charity accounts, plus the certification of a number of grant claims. Page 9 of the plan sets out the materiality levels for the council, and that's what we worked to this year. That's sort of our threshold, really, our tolerance threshold in terms of what we perceive as a significant error or not, if indeed there are any errors in the accounts. So what that means in practice is we've got to figure that at £4.8 million as being that threshold. And what that means in practice, just for clarity and for information, is that any uncorrected errors in excess of that figure would result in a qualification of the council's accounts. It's rare for us to be in that territory, but just to outline what that means in practice. But we also set lower materiality thresholds for certain other areas of the accounts, and these are areas we deem material by nature, i.e. the types of things that would be sensitive to users of the accounts, particularly in regard to a public sector body, which was commented upon earlier, really, in terms of what the activities of the council. And there's two key areas there where we set lower materiality levels. One is in regard to senior officer remuneration, whereby we set a limit of £1,000, and the other area is in regard to related party disclosures, whereby we set a limit of £10,000. So they need to be read, I guess, in the context of the £4.8 million materiality level. Just going on then to page 10 of the plan, which that sets out really the key audit risks we've identified for this year, and also other areas of audit focus. There's 4 areas there which we've identified. One is management override. I say this all the time, but don't be alarmed. It's not something we think is a particular risk to this council. It's common, this risk, in regard to all our audit plans. It's something we've got to consider as part of our audit work, as per auditing standards. So it's not a unique risk in regard to this council. And there's also then 3 areas of focus. One is the accounting of the pension fund. We've touched on that already, courtesy of Gemma's introduction, but that is a highly material area of the accounts, and it's also subject to a high degree of judgment and estimation from the actuaries in determining those values within the accounts. Secondly, the valuation of land and buildings, quite similar really to the pension fund aspects, really, in the sense that we're talking about highly material values and a high degree of estimation. So that increases the risk really of error, hence the inclusion of that matter within this audit plan. And finally, I've talked about the lower materiality levels in regard to related parties and remuneration disclosures, but that then means there's a greater risk of material error, so therefore it's included in the plan as an area of focus. Moving then on to page 13, that sets out the timetable for the year. Not a great deal to comment on that particular element of the plan, but suffice to say, we're on track to achieve that deadline, and we're working to a deadline at the end of November. And finally, page 15 summarises some of our grant certification work requirements at the council this year. That's probably all I'll say at this stage, but I'll address any questions, but it's probably a good time to bring in Sarah Jane to talk about some of the performance aspects of the plan.
Okay. Thank you, Steve. Thanks, Chair. Sorry, Chair, can you hear me? Can everyone hear me okay? Yeah. Okay, so I'm just going to cover off the performance audit work for the year, which is set out on page 14, you'll be familiar with our assurance and risk assessment. Tom mentioned this earlier. This is a process that we do every year. We look at a range of arrangements and different services to help us understand where there are any risks or any audit risks, and help us discharge our duties, but also to help us determine where we want to focus our work. In terms of local work for this year, then, I should say, sorry, first of all, on the assurance and risk assessment, as part of that, we have decided that we will sort of take a look at, or have a focus on rather, the council's arrangements working with schools to help address any schools balances. I know Gemma talked about that, the situation more broadly there, but that is something that we want to keep an eye on. But in terms of the local work for the Vale this year, we've decided we want to do a piece of work around the council's complaints arrangements. I know there were some new arrangements a year or so ago, so we wanted to do a piece of work on that. And we're also going to be doing a piece of work around the setting of wellbeing objectives. That is a piece of work that we have to do at each council, so before we report next year. So that will be something we'll be doing over the course of the year. Steve mentioned the grant certification. I just then want to sort of draw your attention to the fee. This is consistent with the communications that the Auditor General has shared throughout the year, both through the fee consultation and the fee scheme, in terms of the increase to the fee. I would also, it's not mentioned specifically in the audit plan, but I would like to make you aware that the Auditor General did write out to chief executives, I think it was last week, explaining that in order to help us address our kind of backlog, our performance audit backlog, you might have noticed there's we're not doing a thematic piece of work this year, and he's taken the decision to do that to help us address that backlog. The original thematic was going to be on workforce, so we decided to postpone that piece of work to 25-26. What that may mean is that there may be a refund on the performance audit aspect of the fee. We don't know the level of that. We won't know that until the other work has been complete, but I wanted to make Governance and Audit Committee aware of that, and that is something that we'll keep officers aware of throughout the year. So I just wanted to make you aware of that. And then you'll see then in Exhibit 6, that sets out the audit team. There is some continuity there, a new engagement director as well with Gareth Lucy. And then finally, just to draw your attention to page 18, which gives you an overview of the arrangements we've got around our audit quality, our quality assurance arrangements. And then finally, there's some resources at the end of the audit plan that gives you more information about the different work that we do, for example, around our good practice exchange, where to access and find our national reports, that kind of thing. So it's always really helpful to just to make you aware of that. But yeah, I'm sure Steve and I are happy to take any questions. Thank you, Chair.
Yes, thank you, Steve and Sarah Jane. I was hoping that Steve may have said that the draft watermark should have been on page 16, which is the breakdown of the audit fee. Fee will be given a significant reduction due to the thematic work not taking place, and that fee will be in draft. We'll wait and see what happens. Are there any questions for Steve or Sarah Jane?
We do, Chair. Matthew Evans.
Matthew?
Thank you, Chair. Just a couple of quick questions. On page 16, there's two different totals for the audit fee, and I appreciate they're not very different, but some clarity on the right figure would be useful. And then just on the area chosen for performance audit, I guess, just not that I'm suggesting the complaints aren't deeply important, but I just guess I'd welcome some context on the rationale as to why on a single piece of work that's the one chosen.
Sarah? Steve?
With apologies, Matthew. For some reason, when we're accessing this remotely, I think Sarah Jane is having the same problem. There's an overlap between the dialogue from the chair and yourself, so we couldn't actually, which is very peculiar, so we couldn't actually hear that question, I'm sorry. So would it be possible to repeat it? I'm very sorry, but...
That's fine. I shall try and remember what I said. So on page 16, the audit fee, in the second paragraph, it has a £368,000 fee for the total audit, and then there's a different figure at the bottom in the proposed fee. They're not materially different, but just to clarify which is the right one. That's question one. And question two is just the rationale of why you've decided to look at complaints for your performance audit area. Thank you.
I'm sorry.
Sorry, Steve, there was a lag then with our system. Can you repeat that, please?
Yeah, absolutely, yes. No, thank you for the question. I'll address the question with the fee. Yes, the correct fee would be the one in the table, the one in the, and thank you for identifying that. There was an adjustment to the adoption fee during the compilation of the audit plan. So the table was adjusted, but there was an oversight then in terms of amending the figure in the narrative. So apologies for that. That's a very good spot, but thank you. I think Sarah Jane will need to answer the question. Unfortunately, I can't answer that in regard to the complaints matter.
Yes, so in terms of why we've chosen to look at the complaints as part of our assurance and risk assessment process, we haven't looked at this before. It is obviously a key way in which the council can understand, if there are any concerns or as a key piece of information. But the council had introduced and was amending its arrangements. Also, when we looked at the Ombudsman produces a kind of annual report about the level of complaints, the numbers were relatively high for the Vale. So that prompted us to kind of do a bit more digging, really. We want to get some assurance around those arrangements and that the council are exploring and understanding those complaints. So I hope that gives you a bit more information. Obviously, once we've developed a scope and a project brief, I'm more than happy to sort of share that with the Governance and Audit Committee at a later date. Thank you.
Thanks, Sarah Jane. Any other questions? No? Are there any comments? No? Gemma, do you want to say anything else before we go to the recommendations?
No, thank you, Chair. Nothing else to pick up on the accounts at this stage. Thank you.
Okay, I'm trying to get my recommendations, just bear with me. There are three or four recommendations. Just trying to get the top of the page. In regards, I think they relate to the statement, the main statement of accounts and then the committee statement of accounts and providing feedback to the 151. I was just wondering whether the committee and 151 would have any objection in regards to amending the recommendation basically to say that the August 2024, it says to be reviewed, and then comments of the committee or committee member be referred to the finance section 151 officer by the 31st of July. Would that satisfy Matt if people got comments for you rather than have to go through them all this evening?
Yeah, we're happy to take comments.
Okay.
Sorry, Chair, can I just clarify? Chair, can I just clarify for the members in the chamber that the recommendations are per the report in front of them, and apart from the date of the 31st of July for members to send in any comments to the head of finance.
Yes, exactly.
Thank you, Chair. Thanks.
So, Gareth, that's in relation to recommendation 1, 2, and 3. So, if we put the 31st of July in each of those, then obviously members can comment on the unaudited statement of accounts, the unaudited joint committee, shared regulatory service, and the fines and card official adoption service. If that's satisfactory, just put that in. Recommendation 4 is that we look at contents of the audit and 2024. Is that the best?
Yeah, some I understand, Chair. It's from the report, but some members are struggling to hear you in the chamber. So, would you like to disconnect and reconnect again, Chair? That seemed to work for a moment last time.
Okay.
Just bear with us while the Chair reconnects. Welcome back, Chair.
Is that working now?
It seems to be, Chair. I just wonder whether if we have problems again, Chair, that perhaps the Vice Chair could take over if I notify you.
Yeah, no, you carry on. We'll be dipping in and out. And I apologise. The recommendations, though, Gareth, were in regards to comments. Apart from the comments raised at committee, that any member wishes to make any comment on the 3 sets of unaudited statement of accounts, do so to the 151 officer by the 31st of July.
Thank you, Chair. I got that, yeah.
And the last one, recommendation 4, is to note the audit statement. So if people can understand that, I apologise. And if someone would move those recommendations.
Yes, Chair, Councillor Hooper and Councillor Goodjohn have just seconded and moved them. So it's all.
Thank you very much. Anyone object? No? Good, thank you. My apologies. Do you want me to hand over to the Vice Chair, Gareth?
Nigel, would you be prepared to take on the chair for the rest of the remainder of the meeting? Nigel Island.
Hi, Gareth. Yes, in principle. I've just put some information in the chat because there is significant lag on this end, and we are, if you're remote at the moment, there's a significant overlap and issues happening with this. So yeah, I can take it on, but I confess I've lost a bit of where we are just in the last 3 or 4 minutes just because of that lag. So yeah, I think, have we just finished item 6? Is that where we are at the moment?
Yes, so we've just done the recommendations for item 6, and we're on to item 7, which is the draft annual governance statement.
Okay, yeah, then happy to pick it up from there. We are where I think we are, yes. So yeah, said that. So I'll have to find the papers, but if the relevant person can start talking, I'll quite happily pick up from there. That'd be great. Thank you.
I'm only going to give this a short intro, so hopefully you find them relatively promptly. So the annual governance statement, under regulation, we're required to undertake an annual review of the effectiveness of our systems of internal control and governance. This outcome, the outcome of this review is then presented in our annual governance statement, which also forms an integral part of our statement of accounts and is audited by Audit Wales alongside the statements that we've just gone through in the last item. The council does have a very well established system of internal control and governance framework, and the AGS that's in Appendix A to the report, I'm sure you'll observe, will have a very familiar look to it from previous years. I did certainly have another read of it myself this afternoon. It's very comprehensive, but it's not perhaps the easiest of reads, and that's perhaps as a consequence of it being added to over a period of time. So I would, for 24/5, like to take the opportunity to streamline it, but certainly being very mindful of the importance of the document, and not doing anything to detract from that importance. I guess the important fact, though, for this evening is that it concludes that reasonable assurance can be given to our arrangements. And I know that's a piece of terminology we're familiar with. It is a little bit technical, isn't it? Reasonable assurance. But the important thing is that that is saying that our arrangements are in good order, if we were to use a bit more common language. The AGS does provide an update on issues which were raised last year and sets out the actions that have been undertaken to address those issues. I guess given the environment we operate in, it wouldn't be a surprise at all to see some of those workforce challenges, expectations around demand for services and financial resilience being issues that feature in the AGS in future years going forward. There are some new issues for 23/4, most notably the challenges associated with the implementation of major IT systems. And we considered that in quite some detail here in a recent meeting. Also, we've picked up in the document some of the emerging risks that the council's facing, and that's also been mentioned earlier this evening as well, being the replacement social care system. So just a bit brief intro to the paper, and happy to take any questions you have, and obviously other colleagues here to help me field them as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Matt. Thank you for that. Are there any questions on this paper? Okay. I just one sort of comment from me. I'll open up to comments in a second, but I'm glad you said that, Matt, about the detail in there. It is a little bit repetitive when you're reading it, and I just, if that could be looked at for the future, because I think it does make it quite a challenge to get through the document. And I did find myself reading the same thing over and over again. I sort of appreciate that there are different sections in there where you do need to refer back to those different points. So evidently you've picked that up yourself, but I think something like this is a really valuable document. And I think it is something that it would be really good if it was more accessible and a little bit easier to read, just to make sure it was proven that I did actually read the document as well. On page 30 in the bottom box, there's a missing closing bracket, but that's purely to prove that I read it at all. Are there any other comments on this paper at all?
Yes, no, Councillor Hooper would like to speak.
Yeah, Councillor Hooper.
Thanks, Nigel. I'm just picking up on that point, and one of the things that's and I'm pleased that you mentioned the Oracle learnings that are going into this. I think that's really important, because I think that was arguably a failure of governance as well as a failure of other issues. But I think there's an opportunity in light of that. It becomes an area of interest to the general public. So I think we need to find a way of being able to try and lift this out into something that not just councillors and members can understand, but actually if the general public looked at this and they tried to understand what our governance process is, they would just get lost in the mire at the moment. you know, we are a bit. So is it worth getting our communication team to think about how we make this something that is, you know, accessible, interesting, because it went wrong. So everyone gets interested when things go wrong, don't they? 3.7 million, whoa, it gets interest. How do we make people realise that this is something that we've got a handle on here and we are in control of it? It's a big challenge because there's a lot of words, but I welcome your views on it. Thank you.
No, I think that's a good suggestion. That's something we'll take away. Perhaps have an exec summary or some sort of infographic type thing, presentation of it. But we do want it to. I do want it to be accessible, and especially when you look at some of the challenge we had around Oracle, it does detract from the fact that overall the council has a really strong internal control environment.
Thank you, Matt. Yeah, it's a really good point. I think an executive summary may be a positive approach to that. I think if we can, just avoiding listing everything we don't, like just listing, I don't know how to put this any more politely, I do apologise, but listing stuff rather than focusing it down on what are the key things that we demonstrate that our governance is working effectively would be really good. And I appreciate that there's a lot of good stuff happening within the local authority and a lot of learning from where things have gone wrong as well. So, you know, I think for next time, probably looking at the document as a whole, but in the meantime, some form of executive summary may well address that. Gareth, is there anyone else in the chamber?
Yes, please, Councillor Goodjohn.
Yeah, thank you, Vice Chair. Thank you. Just to reflect on your point there, what I'm kind of looking for is what did we do differently this year? So things like the monitoring officer, it's great to mention that, but it's not different to any other year. What happened this year is particularly important. Any examples of effective controls or not effective controls in the year is what I'm looking for. I wonder if we need to reflect more on two key points. One is Oracle. Do we need to reflect more on how governance arrangements failed during 23-24? I think specifically of scrutiny not being brought in earlier. I think personally that was a failure of governance, that we could have reflected upon things quicker, we could have intervened quicker and assisted in a constructive manner faster. Although I understand that is a personal opinion, but I think it's one that's shared generally by the Scrutiny Committee Corporate Performance and here as well, from when we talked about it. The second thing I'm quite worried about is corporate complaints and the number that's being dealt with within timescales, and this has been an issue for about a year now, and it doesn't seem to be getting much better. So I wonder if there's much reflection we need to consider, not only that these are failures that have occurred across the year, but what specific actions are being taken, and maybe even some examples of the actions that's being taken to remedy this for next year might be useful to have in the document. Thank you.
Matt, did you want to come back on that?
The AGS is going to be shared with Audit Wales tomorrow in this format. But what we'll do across the course of the audit is have a look at if we can pick a couple of those issues that you've just raised up and perhaps have a bit more coverage of those in the document. We do have the statutory deadline to deliver to, so it's important we do get across to them promptly. I would just go back to the Vice Chair's observations and a couple of the points that you picked up on as well, and just perhaps managing expectations from some of the streamlining that I talked about. The document does have to span everything. So unfortunately, it will look very similar from one year to the next because it needs to talk about the whole environment. But certainly what we can do, and I would expect us to do, is have a bit more focus and attention on those things that are different and have changed. So that's a fair comment.
Fine. If that can be changed for next year, that's fantastic. Also, there's a typo in the second box on page 29. Cheers.
Thank you, Councillor Good John. We'll add it to my bracket. Is there any other comments on this document? I'm not seeing anything come up. So I think if we can, there's essentially, I think we're adding a second recommendation to this paper. So the first one is the draft annual governance statement be recommended for adoption by the leader, but that being caveated slightly with if there can be some reflection on the Oracle situation and whether that's adequately covered and the lessons learned from that, and also corporate complaints. So not looking for it to necessarily come back, but just to request that is please looked at as part of the process, just to feed into that. Subject to that amendment, then we happy to approve that?
Yes, Chair. Sorry, Vice Chair. We have a second. Councillor Hooper. Thank you, Chair.
Great, thank you. So moving on to agenda item 8 then, which is progress against external regulatory recommendations and proposals for improvement. Haven't heard from Tom for a while, so I think this is over to you, Tom.
Thank you for giving me a rest, Vice Chair, and thanks for taking this report. This is the Q4 progress, as you say, against those recommendations that are made by our external regulators, and we referenced this earlier on in your discussions this evening. So the report is produced as at April 2024, and within it there's an appendix of all of the regulatory recommendations and their statuses. At Q4, positive progress has been made in responding to those. There are 52 in total that are being tracked in that regulatory report tracker. 25 of those actions relate to local pieces of work that have been conducted, so specifically making recommendations to the Vale of Glamorgan, and of those 25, 80% of them have got a green status, with just one action being attributed a red status. That red status relates to a review of the housing quality standard, and specifically relating to some work that is being done on the housing portal, or the housing system customer portal. That's suffered some delays, but is considered a low recommendation in terms of our response rate to it. So, and that will be attended to in the coming months. In terms of the national recommendations, so where Audit Wales make recommendations that apply to all 22 local authorities and potentially other public bodies, there are 27 actions within the Insight Tracker, all of which have been attributed a green status at the end of the year. The report also then outlines for committee members, as you would expect at end of year, a series of 13 actions that were reported as being completed. 4 of those relate to local pieces of work, and the remainder to the national pieces of work. So the report is being brought to yourselves, committee, this evening as part of our general housekeeping around these recommendations. Every month we consider these as a team on a quarterly basis. The Strategic Insight Board consider the progress against them. We report them throughout the year as part of the performance monitoring arrangements to all scrutiny committees. Your committee will be aware that you receive this information as part of the Council's annual self-assessment report in the autumn, and then Council do in the winter. But we bring this to you now as I say, a housekeeping report, so that you're able to see the progress that has been put in place. And I just wanted to highlight that the last time we brought the report, I know committee members suggested it would be a good idea to prioritise the responses to these recommendations, and just to say that that we've done that, and also that the people who are working on these recommendations welcomed having that that approach, because it's allowed us to focus on the things that need to get done in the order that they need to get done, and I think that that's borne out by the positive progress that's been made in addressing these, and we take this part of our work incredibly seriously. So that's just a brief overview, Vice Chair.
Thank you, Tom. Are there any questions from anyone?
Councillor Goodjohn.
Yeah, Councillor Goodjohn.
Thank you, Vice Chair. Well, it was read and it says Welsh Housing Quality Standards, so I had to pick up on it. I'm really interested in this new portal for our housing tenants, which they'll be able to use in future, and that this, which is a wider positive development, leading to us seeing it as read as it's dependent on wider factors. This generally seems to be a positive, so any information as to why we think this might delay the recommendation being implemented would be interesting, Tom. I also just wanted to pick up on financial sustainability, if you'll let me. That's been given amber because only 79% of savings have been achieved. I would personally say that, considering our finances are still in order and we haven't had to make some of the savings, I know some of them aren't deliverable, but some of them didn't actually end up having to be made and were cancelled on that basis, it would seem. So I would generally say that seems more positive than negative. So any comments on that probably from Matt would be useful as well.
Thank you, Councillor Goodjohn. In terms of that that question relating to the housing audit, so the recommendation that Audit Wales colleagues made as part of that review was that we should evaluate how effective the process is for tenants to report repairs via Contact One Vale. So we've done part of that work. So we've undertaken some of that review. As you say, it is a really positive development that there will be an online portal available for housing tenants. That's being rolled out now in terms of the replacement of their existing system within the housing service. The reason for it being read is a timing in terms of the response to that recommendation and being able to complete it. So absolutely, I agree with you that it will be a really positive development for tenants when it becomes available, and it is a matter of timing, the fact that it's being shown as read, because we've not done it as quickly as we'd have wanted to.
I don't know.
Is that okay, Councillor Goodjohn? Oh, sorry, Matt. Yeah, go ahead.
Sorry. I guess there's always some level of subjectivity around some of these matters. At the end of the day, we've not fully delivered the savings programme, and so I think the rating's appropriate. As Gemma took you through earlier on, we've had some upsides in the financial year, and some of those policy items have certainly been very welcome. But also worth reflecting that our reserves perhaps aren't as strong as I'd have liked them to have been at the end of the year. The majority of the reduction in the reserves were in a planned manner, and part of our budgeting arrangements, but there were some unplanned ones as well. So difficult one to call, but I'm happy with how we've rated it.
Yeah, just to say that I'm happy on the whole. I'm sure I'll take up offline information about the new portal, because that sounds really interesting. And just on financial sustainability, I think at the end of the day, it looks like we've come out with 2 million more than we thought we would at the start of the year, which isn't fantastic considering the amount of reserves we had to use. But at the end of the day, we didn't make all the savings, but those are still cuts. I think we have to admit that the vast majority of them are still cuts, at least in that savings proposal. And if we didn't have to make them, and we're still in a better position than we thought, we have to admit to ourselves that's a positive thing, not a negative thing.
Can I ask a kind of procedural type question on this? That particular action that we're talking about, the recommendation we're talking about, refers to 22-23 and 23-24. We're now in 24-25, so we're looking ahead to future savings. Taking on those points about the fact that maybe we didn't get to where we wanted to be, or perhaps we did get to where we want to be, but for other reasons. How does this action then transfer into 24-25 in terms of a new recommendation? Is there something else, or does this one close off? Can you just explain to me how this works in terms of moving forward into the next year?
Certainly, Nigel, no problem at all. That action will be in effect superseded by Audit Wales, who are going to be undertaking a financial sustainability audit of all 22 local authorities again this year. They'll produce as part of that a national report, but they'll also produce local reports specific to each of the 22 local authorities. That's a really welcome piece of work for the council, and once we receive the recommendations in both any national but certainly the local report, we will then look to include those into the action tracker. Anything that is outstanding from a previous recommendation we would look to combine, but if not, that one will close down and be replaced by a new action.
That's great. Thank you, Tom. That's really useful. Any other questions at all?
Matthew Evans.
Yeah, Matthew?
Just quickly, Tom, there's an awful lot of actions there with a targeted date of March 2025. So I just wondered on your confidence to deliver all of those by that date.
Thank you, Matthew. We do review these on a quarterly basis. There are lots of them in one place, but they're delivered by a number of different colleagues, and I think that's where my remarks earlier around people welcoming that prioritisation suggestion from the committee has been genuinely welcomed, because it's allowed people to prioritise. Lots of these things as well we will have started work on immediately once we receive draft recommendations from Audit Wales colleagues, so that gives us a little bit of kind of a headwind as well on things.
Thank you, Matt. That was a similar question to mine. I think all but 3 of the local regulatory actions have a target of March 2025. Tom, what does the priority rating actually do? Because whether they're high, medium or low, they all have a target date of March 2025. And I noticed, for example, the ones relating to digital strategy review seem to be ones that need to be completed earlier rather than later. They're kind of at the start of the strategy. When setting the strategy, what do we build into it? So is that high, medium and low used to actually think about when do we need to do these, or is it can you just give a bit of an explanation about when you said it was received positively, what impact is it having, because it doesn't seem to be affecting the target date?
Thank you, Nigel. And it has impacted on the achievement date, but because we've introduced it midway through a period and some of those actions would have been from prior years, I think that's what's meant that it's kind of, it means that lots of them look like they have not been prioritised in that way. But the priority rating of a high would mean that we would look to be implementing within 1 year, medium within the short term, so up to 2 years maximum, and anything that's lower response within 1 to 3 years. And because we've given those ranges as well in terms of within a year, within 1 to 2, and within 1 to 3 in terms of high, medium, low, what we've asked colleagues to do is consider actually could they do those things. For example, even if it's low, could they do it within the first year instead of taking up to 3? And that's where people have indicated. I think what colleagues have welcomed is having the flexibility of being able to do that, alongside the fact that some of these were introduced that priority weighting was introduced midway through having received the recommendations.
Okay, thank you. That's great. Any further questions? No. Are there any comments? No, okay. So we're asked to review the progress to date, which I think we've done, and we've had a good discussion about that, and that we refer any views and recommendations to Cabinet, including endorsing the removal of completed actions from the Strategic Insight Board and Insight Tracker. Are we happy to approve that?
Yeah, that was moved by Councillor
Gareth?
Goodjohn and seconded by Councillor Hooper. Thank you.
That's great. Thank you. So moving on to agenda item 9. This is the Audit Wales Work Programme 2024. Tom, is this you again?
Thank you, Vice Chair. I don't know whether Sarah Jane, whether you wanted to present this or whether you want me to take you through.
Yeah, thank you, Tom. Thank you, Vice Chair. If you're happy, I can run through it. I mean, essentially what this report does is give you an overview in terms of where we are with our work, both in terms of the financial audit aspects and the performance audit aspects. There is some duplication, obviously, in terms of what we've just discussed in terms of the audit plan. And I'm sure if there are any particular things that Steve wants to highlight around the account side, he'll come in after me. But yeah, it is really just a summary of the work that we've done. And Steve did talk about the timescales around the accounts and the other aspects relating to grants and that kind of thing. And again, in terms of the performance audit work, as I said, it gives you an overview of that. It does talk about, for example, we just talked about the financial sustainability work. As Tom said, we are doing that thematic piece of work at all 22 councils. That's something that we're doing at the moment. We'll be issuing the draft to the council very soon, and there will be a national summary report in the autumn. That's clearly a really important piece of work. And the other thematic that we're doing, mentioned on page 5, is a review of commissioning, and that work is underway. You'll be aware of some of the other pieces of work that we've done because reports have gone to scrutiny and to yourselves as well. And as I mentioned, the 24-25 work we talked about earlier in terms of what we're doing, just a correction there, it does say about potential areas of work. But as I mentioned earlier, in terms of the audit plan, we will be doing work on complaints, and we will be doing work as part of our assurance and risk assessment in terms of understanding the council's arrangements around addressing schools' balances. The rest of the report gives you an overview and update in terms of where we are with our local government studies, also the work of Estin and Care Inspectorate Wales, and then an update in terms of our national studies publications. So, it provides links to that and an update in terms of planned work as well. So to draw your attention, we are going to be publishing a summary report of the digital thematic that we've done, and also a national summary of the performance information thematic that we've done. So those are two that I'm aware that have been considered by Governance and Audit Committee fairly recently. I think, and just at the end, it talks about the good practice exchange events and resources, the audit committee event that we did a couple of a month or so ago, and there's also the event being held again in North Wales later on this year. But happy to take any questions. Thank you, Vice Chair, sorry.
That's fine. I'll take the promotion. That's no problem at all. Steve, did you want to come in and add anything, or are you happy for that to continue? I'm assuming I'll take that as happy for that. Yeah, Steve?
Yes, I'm sorry. Yes, just one very quick comment. Sarah Jane covered the ground. There's not much else to add, but I just want to draw your attention to the fact that we talk about our 22-23 audit work being completed, but there is one element that remains incomplete, and that's nothing to do with the council or officers of the council. It's very much an Audit Wales issue. And that's our outstanding work in regard to the housing benefit grant certification work for last year, 22-23 that is. Our work is actually well advanced. We've made a good start on it. And there's, again, it was going fairly well, but we had to pause our work because of our NHS final accounts audit work. So we will be recommencing that work very shortly. So I expect to complete around about the end of August. So it's just to be totally upfront, really, in terms of the completion of our work as set out in that document.
Thanks, Steve, and thanks, Sarah Jane, for the report as well. Appreciate your honesty from one audit to another. I know that that can be tough, so I appreciate the honesty there. Any questions on this report from any of the councillors or lay members? No. I just was any comments from anyone? No. Okay. I'll just a comment from me that it's always interesting. I think I say this every time I receive this report, but it is interesting to see what's coming up and what's gone before. And I look forward to the digital one as well. I think that's a very interesting area for a lot of organisations at the moment. So I look forward to receiving that one. Recommendations are that we review and note the contents of the report and refer it on to Cabinet for their oversight. Can I have a proposer and a seconder, please?
Councillor Goodjohn and Councillor Hooper, Vice Chair.
Great. Thank you. Moving on to agenda item 10 then, which is the corporate fraud report. And Andrew, first voice of yours for this evening. Oh, no, it's not. It's Joan. Welcome, Joan.
Thank you. Thank you, Vice Chair.
Joan, I'll hand over to you.
Thank you very much. Good evening. I'm Joan Davis. Agenda item 10 is our annual corporate fraud report, which provides members of this committee with details of the actions undertaken in respect of our counter-fraud work during 23-24. The Council's corporate fraud officer is not part of the regional service, but is managed and supported by us. The Council's counter-fraud strategy and framework underpins the Council's commitment to prevent all forms of fraud, bribery and corruption, whether it be attempted externally or from within, and progress against this is outlined in the annual report. The annual report is at Appendix A, but I'll briefly take you through the key points. So Section 1 of the annual report provides context. It outlines the impact of the fraud within the public sector and the measures in place within the veil to try and mitigate the risk. Section 2 outlines the proactive work undertaken during the year. The agreed action plan is at Annex 1 of the report, and this details progress made against each task. This includes areas such as training and fraud awareness, fraud policies, the fraud risk register, and the use of data analytics. I'd like to highlight that the Corporate Fraud Officer has and will continue to deliver fraud awareness sessions across the directorates, and a fraud prevention e-learning module has been developed and will be rolled out during 2024. In addition, a new corporate fraud enforcement policy was considered by this committee and subsequently approved by Cabinet in March 2024. Section 3 of Appendix A outlines the progress made with the National Fraud Initiative. This is a data matching exercise coordinated in Wales by Audit Wales. The matches are based on data extracted from council systems in October 2022, and this data was matched against data submitted from other bodies such as other local authorities, the DWP, NHS bodies, police, housing associations, etc. A total of 3,393 matches were received across such things as housing benefit, council tax reduction, payroll, blue badges, creditors, licensing, etc. A total of 1,937 matches have been reviewed. This has resulted in the identification of 189 errors or possible frauds. From the review, 179 of these related to blue badge matches. However, there are no recoverable financial savings from these. This can be seen as a data cleansing exercise. However, Table 1 does list NFI projected savings from these, and these are defined by Cabinet Office methodology. This methodology predicts the potential and projected loss if a fraud or error had not been identified. It's not real money to the council and cannot be reflected in bottom line savings. Annex 3 attached to the report does provide a summary of the Cabinet Office methodology. The other 10 matches have resulted in £15,396 of recoverable savings to the council. These were from creditors and council tax reduction matches, and further details are in Annex 2 of our report. The council also receives single person discount matches annually. If it is determined that single person discount is incorrectly claimed and applied, an adjustment is made to the account to recover the incorrect payment. The details are in Table 1 within the report, and errors on 95 accounts have so far generated £4,234, which is recoverable. Section 4 highlights the reactive fraud work which has been undertaken during 23-24. These have been generated by referrals to internal audit by relevant managers or via the Speak Out line. There were 6 potential fraud matters reviewed during 23-24, and these are detailed in Table 3. 2 of these resulted in recovery of £11,444. Section 5 gives examples of collaborative working. Throughout 23-24, joint working with the DWP has resulted in several benefit fraud referrals being exchanged between both parties. In addition, the Corporate Fraud Officer continues to work closely with the Council's revenue and benefits teams in identifying and investigating all suspected cases of benefit fraud. And to assist with this, the Corporate Fraud Enforcement Policy will enable sanctions to be considered following investigations where appropriate. That's all I'd like to point out at this stage, and I'm happy to take any questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Joan. Thank you for that summary of that report. That's great. Thank you. Any questions from anyone? No?
Councillor Goodjohn. Sorry, Vice Chair.
Councillor Goodjohn, yeah.
Yeah, just to ask the obvious question that the amount of fraud on single person discount, but also on most other aspects this year is far down on previous year. Do we have any idea as to why that might be? Any explanation at all? Just out of interest.
Thank you for the question, Councillor Goodjohn. Partly it's because over time the data matches, they become less relevant, if you like, because the data is more accurate when the data is pulled out. And secondly, I think it's fair to say there has been resource issues, so not as many matches has been looked at as we would have liked in 23-24.
So can I come back on that, Vice Chair?
Yeah, absolutely.
I'm just interested as to the reasoning behind that. Was any of that due to the budget saving? And also, was any of that due to the National Fraud Initiative that was undertaken?
It's just, I think the simple answer is it's a consequence of capacity issues in the team and then the number of initiatives and that they're currently working on. But we do have that programmed in for a specific piece of work in the current financial year.
Great.
Thank you. A really good point there, because some of these roles can pay for themselves, can't they? If you invest in that resource and they can recover money that shouldn't have been paid out for whatever reason, there's a good reason to recover that, and positive to see that there is still some of that money being recovered. So that's great. Any other questions at all? Any comments? No. Okay. So we are asked to note the report and the measures in place and work being undertaken to prevent and detect fraud. Can I have a proposer and a seconder, please?
Yes, Vice Chair, we've got Councillor Hooper and Councillor Goodjohn again. Thank you.
Thank you. Just keep your hands up for the rest of the meeting, if that's okay. Item 11 then is the update on the progress of limited assurance opinions. Are we coming back to you again for this, Joan? Or is Andrew? Oh, Andrew.
Evening.
Hi, Andrew.
Evening. Good evening, Vice Chair. Good evening, members. I am here, honest. So yeah, this report is based on the information requested by members of committee. It's in relation to the limited reports that we've issued in 23-24. So just as an overview, at the previous Governance and Audit Committee meeting, members required directors to provide a written response in terms of progress being made against the implementation of the recommendations made in our limited assurance internal audit reports for 23-24. Directors and heads of service have subsequently provided that response, and that's attached to Appendix A. Just to give members a little bit of background of how we arrived at that situation, in terms of the audits which we undertake, The objective is to provide assurance or otherwise on the adequacy of the internal control environment, governance arrangements and risk management processes in place, and to minimise fraud or error. We undertake testing against key controls to ensure this compliance, and we base our assessments on the evidence that we obtain. We provide a balanced report at the end of our audit, and that's made up of strengths and weaknesses identified in terms of the testing we've undertaken. Where we have any weaknesses, we then agree an action plan, which includes recommendations, which is agreed by the operational manager. Where the weaknesses are significant, in terms of the risk associated with those, that tends to lead to a limited or no assurance level of opinion. I'm sure members will be familiar by now that the opinions we use are substantial, reasonable and limited, and no assurance, those are set out with a definition at paragraph 1.4. To give some context to the report, Table 2 identifies the number of limited reports compared to the other opinions we've issued in 23-24, totaling 56 opinions. Members will also be familiar that the 10 that we were talking about have been previously presented to committee, apart from the car parking income, which we will provide to you at our next quarterly update. So the information then is in Appendix A, in terms of the management action plan, our recommendations, the original management comments, and an update provided to me from the respective head of service and or director. And just to give members some reassurance there, we have a process within the team in terms of limited audit opinions. Where we issue a limited audit opinion, then the respective head of services has to have an opportunity, a reasonable amount of time to address the issue we've identified, to implement the recommendation and demonstrate an improvement. So we will go back and we will follow up that audit hopefully within around about a 6-month timescale. And the proof of all the recommendations that have been, all the updates which have been provided to you this evening will be when we do the follow-up audit and report back to committee, hopefully an improved audit opinion. If the opinion is still limited due to the fact that the recommendations have not been implemented or the risk has not been mitigated, then we'll be reporting that back into committee in due course. So where we have a consecutive 2 limited opinions or no assurance opinions, then that is kind of key in terms of our process, reporting that back into committee, and we'll be advising you as members to invite the respective head of service or director in for them to give you assurance that improvements will be made moving forward. Happy to take any questions, Chair. Vice Chair.
Thanks, Andrew. Any questions?
Councillor Goodjohn, Vice Chair.
Okay, Councillor Goodjohn.
Yeah, this is a question for Tom, actually. Any update on the fundraising policy as part of the Officers' Code of Conduct? That's been mentioned as a medium priority, and we haven't seen much progress. So any updates since here?
Thank you, Councillor Goodjohn. Absolutely. When we reviewed the outstanding audit recommendations that our resources leadership team in the last couple of weeks, that one came up, and there's a discussion happening between the head of legal services and Matt in terms of head of finance. We've got a couple of examples of those fundraising policies where they've been used in other local authorities. We're just wanting to make sure that it would be fit for purpose here within the Vale, and that we can then communicate it in a timely way. So yeah, work is underway to address that one.
Any other questions? Oh, yeah. Thanks, Councillor Goodjohn. Any other questions? Just 2 from me. There are a number of recommendations in the table that don't have a response update. Majority of them are low priority, but there is one medium priority under the Officer Code of Conduct. Just wondering why they don't have a response. And also, I'm not sure whether there's anyone there that can actually answer this question, but in relation to the libraries and digital equipment report, one of the high priority recommendations was around no devices being open to the public, being able to reach sensitive material. Over and above addressing that particular risk, just wondering if, sort of wondering how that happened in the first place and whether IT are involved in putting those sorts of devices in place in the first instance to prevent somebody this was a found PC, presumably. Are they involved in the actual process now to make sure that no device is put into a public space that could access sensitive material on a wider basis? But I don't know whether there's anyone in the chamber that can answer that question at this point in time.
Thanks, Vice Chair. In terms of the first question, 1.3, I'll take that back. I certainly asked for all responses to get back to me from heads of service by a deadline. We checked that, but unfortunately that was the response we received. So we will follow that one up to make sure we do get a response for that. In terms of libraries, fair point. We'll need to take that question away and get back to you next time, Vice Chair.
Yeah, that'd be great, because it really is about, firstly, as I said, it's not just 1.3. There was another fair few later on that were low priorities that didn't have a response. And again, I just want to make sure that the recommendation owners are taking those seriously. And if not, happy to invite them along to the committee to talk about why they may not be. And in that IT one, again, it's more that the organisation is understanding that where a risk is raised, yes, it may be specific to that particular audit, but it's got to be thought back in terms of the wider organisation and whether there's a wider impact. So, yeah, that'd be great to get responses of those, please. And again, happy to have that discussion with someone who isn't understanding the point I'm trying to make. Okay, if there's no further questions, are there any comments on this report? No, okay. So we're asked to note the progress on the report and the action taken to address issues. Can I have a proposer and a seconder, please?
Matthew Evans and Councillor Hooper.
Good to have a change. Councillor Woods also put his hand up, so perhaps Councillor Wood can come in on the next one. So the next one is the Forward Work Programme. So is this you again, Andrew, or Joe?
Yes, it's me. Thank you, Vice Chair. So the last item, agenda item 12, is the Forward Work Programme. Again, it's a report that's familiar to the committee. Appendix A has been updated to reflect decisions made in previous meetings. The next meeting is scheduled for the 23rd of September, and the agenda items are in the table within the report. So committee are asked to consider and note the Forward Work Programme and endorse the proposed schedule or make any changes as appropriate. Thank you.
Thank you, Joan. Are there any questions? No. Okay. Any comments? Okay. Are we happy to note that and to endorse the schedule for the next meeting of the 23rd of September? And I don't think there's any particular people we need to invite along to that meeting, unless I'm incorrect on that. But we may need to come back to you with the chair. I'll have a conversation with the chair just to double check that. But are we happy to endorse that as it is now?
Yes, Chair. Councillor Prothero and Councillor Goodjohn, Chair.
That's great. Thank you very much. So that's the end of the part 1 agenda. There are no items which I'm aware of that need to be considered as urgent, and I am not aware of any items that would be considered under part 2. So I'm happy to declare the meeting closed. Thank you very much for your attendance and your input into the meeting. It's been a really positive discussion, a lot of good progress there. So thanks everyone for the papers and for the information and for everyone that's contributed this evening. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Good night.
Thank you.